Over the weekend, President Biden declared the COVID pandemic to be over.
Is the pandemic over?
The pandemic is over. We still have a problem with COVID. We're still doing a lot of work on it. But the pandemic is over.
Well, that sounds like good news. However, the federal government continues its efforts to remove service members who decline to get the COVID vaccine for religious or personal reasons. Now, even before Biden's declaration, lawyers from Liberty Counsel argued that American military leaders may have violated federal law in their rejections of religious exemptions from the Defense Department's COVID-19 vaccine mandate. Now, this could explain why fewer than 17% of the almost 25,000 religious exemptions requested were granted. Does the president's announcements make things better for service members who did not get the vaccine? Joining me now to discuss this is Roger K. Gannam, Assistant Vice President of Legal Affairs at Liberty Counsel. Roger, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thanks for having me, Joseph. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. You've been fighting for religious exemptions for service members. Does President Biden's declaration that the pandemic is now over affect these cases?
Well, I sure hope the Secretary of Defense was watching 60 Minutes when President Biden made that statement, because the Secretary of Defense and all the military branches have been fighting us tooth and nail to argue that ongoing universal vaccination without religious exemptions is required. But if the pandemic is really over, then obviously that requirement can't hold up. And to be honest with you, there was never a justification for universal vaccination with no religious exemptions. But that's what the military branches have all done, and we've been fighting them, and we'll continue to fight them until we prevail in court.
Should this announcement be legally significant? Has the Department of Defense's argument been such that they depend on the existence of an ongoing pandemic to make their case?
Well, that's a great question. I think the answer is, well, we can't ever really rely on what President Biden says in public, but we have something that's even more damning to the Department of Defense, and that's a memo from June of this year by the Inspector General of the Department of Defense that found that the review of religious accommodation requests throughout the military was deficient. In a sense, or in a word, the military officers who were reviewing these requests were not giving them due consideration and were just issuing blanket denials across the board. We've been saying that throughout our litigation, but this memo that just came to light this month reveals that the Inspector General and the Department of Defense knew this was the case all along. So this evidence that the religious accommodation requests are not being reviewed properly, along with the president's declaration that the pandemic is over, should be two key pieces of evidence in bringing down these vaccine mandates across the military.
Now let's talk a bit about that memo that you referenced there. When a religious exemption is requested, what is the duty of in this case, the Department of Defense, and how did they behave that was inconsistent with what their duty should have been?
Well, a senior military official in the particular branch is supposed to review all of the facts and circumstances and make an individualized determination as to whether a religious accommodation is possible. But what happened in this case is senior officials were just giving blanket denials. And when those denials were appealed, the appellate official or the official reviewing that appeal did the same thing. In fact, the Inspector General calculated that if the reviewing military officials did nothing else in a 10-hour workday but review religious accommodation appeals, they'd be giving them an average of 12 minutes of attention per appeal. There is no way that satisfies the legal obligation to give each request an individualized review based on all the facts and circumstances. The bottom line is the military has never been able to justify in any particular case that a vaccination was necessary to allow a service member to do his or her job. But the military has been quite content to see thousands of honorable, hardworking and loyal service members walk away from military careers because the military has been unbending in this universal vaccination requirement.
And if you could tell us a bit more about the status of the evictions or the dismissals, because we know that there have been, I think I heard it's over 10,000 service members that had been dismissed, but there's also some indication that that is slowing, and maybe for good reason. What's the rate of service members being dismissed at this point?
Well, I can't update those numbers that you've heard, but I can say we have seen a slowing as a result of class-wide injunctions that have been entered for the Navy, for the Air Force, and for the Marines. So we hope that these injunctions will slow the process down until we can get final relief for all of these service members. And we're hoping that maybe we can obtain that by the end of the year.
Now, you've talked about the information uncovered in this memo indicating that the Department of Defense has not given these requests the individualized attention that the law requires. Have you had the chance to show that to a judge yet and allow him or her to consider that in this case?
To my knowledge, no judge has seen the memorandum yet. But in our Marines case, for example, we're preparing for trial that will occur in January. And if not before then, certainly at that trial, our judge will become aware of this memorandum that shows that the military not only wasn't reviewing requests properly, but that it's known about it for, well, at least since June, if not before.
Yeah. Roger, final question for you. Just this week, New York City fired 850 public school educators, employees, for not being vaccinated. If you are able to prevail in the Department of Defense case, might that have implications for civilians?
Well, that's a great question. I think so, especially in the case of educators, where, again, there can be no showing that justifies across the board denials of exemptions, especially religious-based exemptions under the Constitution, under the First Amendment. So hopefully any decision in our military case will have a ripple effect throughout the country in civilian contexts as well.
Yeah, because the goal certainly is more freedom for people, and that includes our service members, and that includes those who are not service members as well. But we thank you, Roger Gannam, and everyone at Liberty Counsel for doing all that you do on behalf of our first freedoms, and thanks for your time today.